This is the Capitol Rundown.
It is just absolutely heartbreaking to hear these stories.
War is never a necessity. It's a tragedy. President Putin chose this war.
Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm Siobhan Clever. We have a lot to catch you up on in the political world, not only here in Michigan, but across the country as well. And we start this morning with a new report after a 7-month-long investigation into former President Donald Trump and his allies' efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. The development comes as Trump once again seeks the Republican Party's presidential nomination. Nicole D'Antonio is here for you now with more on that report.
On Thursday, Fulton County Superior Court Judge Robert McBurney in Georgia released part of a grand jury report. It focuses on efforts by former President Trump and his allies to overturn Georgia's 2020 election results.
Judges will release portions of reports all the time. What, of course, is not typical is the specifics of what this report is about.
The investigation was first sparked by an hour-long phone call in January 2021. During that conversation, Trump asked Georgia Secretary of State, Republican Brad Raffensperger, to find the votes he needed to win Georgia.
Look, Brad, I have to find 12,000 votes, and I have them.
The report, determined by a unanimous vote, found there was no widespread fraud that could have overturned the presidential election. The report added that the majority of the grand jury believes perjury may have been committed by one or more witnesses called to testify. The Georgia Secretary of State and longtime Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani were among 75 witnesses who testified before the grand jury during the 7-month-long investigation. Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis is still considering whether she will seek indictment.
We just don't have, frankly, that juicy part that we want, which is what about recommendations for other people other than perjury?
The district attorney could be looking at a variety of charges, potentially even for former President Trump, who has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing.
The rest of the report isn't supposed to come out until charges are filed. So there's no indication really when we're going to learn any of the rest of that. It's really in the district attorney's hands at this point.
Another regular grand jury would be asked to issue indictments in the coming weeks or months if District Attorney Willis decides to proceed. Nicole D'Antonio, CBS News, the White House.
A wealthy biotech entrepreneur and investor is entering the Republican race for president. Vivek Ramaswamy is running his campaign on the notion that the U.S. is dealing with a national identity crisis from left-wing ideology. The Ohio native gained popularity for authoring Woke Inc., which focuses on, quote, forced diversity, end quote, across the country. Political officials say the Republican field will be crowded and already again includes Donald Trump and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. Meanwhile, a Texas man has been sentenced to 38 months in prison for charges related to the January 6th riots at the U.S. Capitol. Officials say Garrett Miller assaulted a police officer while traveling across state lines to do it. Prior to getting inside the Capitol, he was detained twice, even handcuffed, but was released after saying he would leave. Police say Miller stayed and continued to record himself and engage in physical altercations with multiple officers. A couple of familiar names to Michigan voters made the headlines this past week. Up next, who was appointed as the new chair of the Republican Party and who might be running for the White House. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Michigan residents and lawmakers are still reeling over the senseless shootings that took place at Michigan State University. Gun control is once again a hot topic among lawmakers, and now the debate continues to see if gun safety proposals could actually pass going forward. Our Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic has details on that and the familiar name from Michigan's past who's considering a run at the White House.
The gun safety issue gets its first legislative hearing in the Michigan Senate this coming week, and it begins a long and protracted debate over what to do to avoid gun violence, of course, in the wake of the tragedy at MSU. This takes on more importance for college students and the like, and they will be lobbying for gun control issues. But on the other hand, the gun lobby, the pro-gun lobby, is basically saying, at least one group, that lawmakers, if you vote yes on this governor's package, we're going to come after you and try to recall you. And so the students and others will frame this debate very succinctly. Politicians, what's more important to you, your political life or the lives of your constituents? And on that debate and on that front, it will be an interesting decision for lawmakers to make. The votes are not there on the governor's side to pass this legislation as of yet, and so the situation is fluid, but introducing the recall element is a potential threat to lawmakers, and it could influence the final outcome of the vote on gun safety proposals. A lot of folks around here still remember Mike Rogers. He is from the mid-Michigan area and served in the state Senate for 8 years, and then he went on to serve 14 years in Congress representing this area. And now he's been making trips to New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Iowa. Now, would you go there for the beaches? Probably not. Why would you go to those 3 states? Well, they are very important states if you're running for president. Mr. Rogers has not announced that he is, but it is pretty clear that he's exploring the possibility. He will be coming into mid-Michigan this coming week on Thursday, and we're going to have an interview with him. And then he goes on to Detroit. And the question will be, Mr. Rogers, do you want to run for president? And we will not let him go unless he answers yay or nay or gives us some other indication as to what his feelings are. The popular wisdom in our town is a more likely fit for Mr. Rogers is a run for the U.S. Senate. And with Debbie Stabenow, the Democratic incumbent, not running, his chances of getting that would probably be a lot higher than getting into the White House. But we'll talk to him next week, so stay tuned.
Tim Skubic, thank you. Kristina Karamo, who has yet to concede her loss in last year's Secretary of State race for Michigan, is now the leader of the state's Republican Party. She won the support of her party over Matthew DePerno, who had former President Donald Trump's backing throughout the race. However, Trump congratulated Karamo on social media, calling her a powerful and fearless election denier. She rose to fame throughout the state during the 2020 election when she claimed to have witnessed fraud during the state's counting of absentee ballots. During her brief victory speech, Karamo said the party will win back the White House and the soon-to-be-open U.S. Senate seat. Coming up, Governor Gretchen Whitmer reiterated a decision that she made on the campaign trail. Plus, lawmakers made a few legislative proposals. We'll talk about all that after the break. Welcome back. Our Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic has been asking this question for months, and he told you back in November that Governor Gretchen Whitmer has no plans to run for president in 2024. Well, now her name is in the headlines because the national media is getting the picture as well. Here's Tim with this story.
They claim that the news travels fast, and now even faster as a result of the internet. But when it comes to the national political media, it has moved very slow behind the Governor Whitmer for President story. Because right after the governor's impressive 11-point victory last November, the national media continued the drumbeat that Michigan's governor was on everybody's list to be a presidential candidate, assuming, of course, that her good friend, President Joe Biden, did not run. The governor has received a ton of free media, adding more fuel to the speculation story about president. This one, in the Washington Post, is a perfect example. Published just days ago, it ranked the top 10 Democrats who could run. And there, at number 8, you guessed it, Governor Whitmer. The governor is sandwiched between the Illinois governor, ranked number 10, at number 9, the Pennsylvania governor, and she's just behind Bernie Sanders, ranked at number 7. The reason she has dropped from number 4 in this poll to number 8 is traced to what she said last November on 6 News, when she basically took herself out of the presidential contest for now. But during interviews after that with the media, the governor never repeated that statement. And for 3 months, no one else uncovered what she said, until reporter Aaron Burke from the Washington Post discovered, quote, a local news station recently pressed her on the speculation, and she said,
I'm not going to run for president in 2024. Period.
You mean it?
Yes, I am not running for anything in the next 2 or 4 years.
The reporter noted that things could change, but that sounded pretty non-glad to him. Exactly. And so, from a political perspective, if those around the governor want to keep the presidential fires burning, they better hope nobody reads the Washington Post. Here for you in Lansing, Tim Skubic, 6 News.
Lawmakers introduced bills in the State House this past week that are designed to prevent intimidation against voters, election workers, and state officials. Those bills, brought forward by Democrats, would ban guns from polling places, including early voting sites or at places where absentee ballots are being counted. Police would be exempt from those bans. The bills would also ban threatening or intimidating poll or election workers, which would be punishable by up to 5 years in prison. The bills have been sent to the State House Committee on Elections. Also in the State House, a Republican lawmaker introduced legislation that's designed to regulate explicit material in public libraries. Under this bill, any library that offers, quote, material that is either obscene or sexually explicit matter that is harmful to minors, end quote, would have to be kept in a separate area off limits to minors and only loaned out to adults. The bill does not clarify what would count as obscene or harmful to minors. If someone finds something that the court says meets those descriptions and it's not kept in a separate adults-only area, the library would be shut down until it is in compliance. This comes amid a national debate over the content of books in libraries and book bans in some communities, including here in Michigan. Coming up next on the rundown, the latest from President Biden, who made a surprise and historic trip overseas this past week. Plus, he made a new nomination for World Bank president. Stay with us for that. Last Monday, President Biden made an unprecedented and surprise visit to Ukraine. He was in Kyiv for about 6 hours, showing U.S. support for the country as it continues to fight off Russia. Then the president went to Poland to meet with NATO allies to again show U.S. support. Jared Hill has more on that visit.
On his final day in Poland, President Biden will meet with NATO allies on the eastern flank, a group known as the Bucharest Nine, along with NATO's Secretary General.
The United States will stand firmly by our commitments inside NATO, inside Article 5 commitment to defend one another if one another is attacked.
Hello, Poland!
Yesterday, the president delivered a defiant speech in Warsaw, declaring unwavering support of Kyiv and NATO, while slamming Russia's invasion of Ukraine nearly 1 year ago.
This war is never a necessity. It's a tragedy. President Putin chose this war. Every day the war continues is his choice.
Just hours earlier, Russian President Vladimir Putin addressed his supporters, blaming the West for the war in Ukraine and suspending Moscow's involvement in the last remaining nuclear arms reduction treaty with the U.S.
It's unfortunate. Frankly, we find it irresponsible for a modern nuclear power such as Russia to pull out of this very significant key arms control agreement.
But Russia's foreign minister later said it would abide by the treaty. The United Nations is urging cooperation.
A world without nuclear arms control is a far more dangerous and unstable one, with potentially catastrophic consequences.
All the while, a U.S. official tells CBS News Russia carried out a failed intercontinental ballistic missile test on Monday during President Biden's visit to Kyiv. Jared Hill, CBS News.
Meanwhile, the Biden administration is now considering the first ever sale for offshore wind energy, which would include areas in the Gulf of Mexico. Officials say this is part of a key push to deploy 30 gigawatts of offshore wind energy by 2030 to help fight climate change. Before a decision is reached, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management plans to hold a 60-day public comment period. Staying with President Biden, he has nominated ex-MasterCard CEO Ajay Banga as World Bank president. Currently, Banga is the vice chairman of General Atlantic and will succeed David Malpass when he steps down on June 30th. He must now be confirmed by the World Bank's executive board before officially taking over. History was made this week in Virginia as a new member of Congress was elected. And coming up, who won that special election and how federal lawmakers are trying to keep children safe while they're online. Stay tuned. History was made in Virginia this week with the first black woman elected to Congress. Jennifer McClellan, the Democrat from Richmond, won a special election over Republican Leon Benjamin to lead the state's 4th district. The seat became available when Representative Donald McEachin died after a long fight with cancer. Virginia is now the 23rd state in the U.S. to have elected a black woman to Congress. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are ramping up their efforts to better protect kids online. Legislation would stop big tech from collecting personal data on children and teenagers and targeting them with advertisements, while also banning kids from social media until they're 13 years old. Our Washington correspondent Jesse Chnor has the latest on this effort.
What social media is exposing these children to is inappropriate.
For years, Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn has blasted big tech companies for failing to stop kids from accessing dangerous content on their platforms, including fentanyl, sex trafficking, and suicide kits.
It is just absolutely heartbreaking to hear these stories.
It should not take grieving parents filing lawsuits to hold this industry accountable.
Last week, Oregon mom Kristen Bride told Blackburn's committee how her 16-year-old son died by suicide after being cyberbullied on Snapchat. Bride urged Congress to pass the legislation Blackburn developed with her Democratic counterpart, Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal.
This mental health crisis will persist, take more young lives, unless Congress cares more about the Kids Online Safety Act than it does about big tech.
The bill would require tech companies to make parental supervision tools and stricter controls on anyone under the age of 16, including on who they can talk to and what they can buy.
It's time to pass bipartisan legislation.
President Joe Biden boosted the bill's chances when he mentioned it during his State of the Union address earlier this month.
Ban targeted advertising to children.
I will tell you, Senator Blumenthal and I had not expected that.
But some internet safety advocates argue the legislation could backfire by encouraging censorship or cutting off important resources for LGBTQ+ kids. In Washington, I'm Jesse Chnor.
If you're interested in getting more political news from Michigan and Washington, we've got just the thing for you. You can sign up for our Capitol Rundown newsletter. It's just one email each week, and you can get it by pointing your cell phone camera at the screen right now. This will take you to the sign-up page, or you can head to WLNS.com/newsletters. And that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching the Capitol Rundown.